would like to welcome Gunlög Fur, Professor of History and Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the Linnaeus University and founding director of the Linnaeus University Centre for Concurrences in Colonial and Postcolonial Studies. First, Gunlög, what is concurrences and what's the story behind you developing this concept?
I think I've always been questioning how to understand the multiplicity of worlds, so to speak, particularly related to colonial cultural encounters. And I've been studying colonial encounters in North America, where one could at one point certainly speak about a first encounter between worlds that had previously not been in contact. And as I was searching around for a term for it, I began to notice that more and more scholars were using simultaneity, in Swedish samtidigheter, to describe the fact that things are occurring at different places according to their own speed and their own logic at the same time. However, I found simultaneity a bit too I found it too flat. I found that it didn't do justice to the complicated nature of the relationship between different spaces and different times interacting across the globe. And so I began looking for a term that would deepen that concept somewhat. And I was intrigued by the word concurrences or concurrence, noticing that it combines an understanding of times moving in parallel concourses. In the English, in the root of the English word is the verb concur, suggesting agreement, suggesting that things run along smoothly. Whereas in the Swedish, the Swedish word, and also in the German, the word konkurrens, based on the same Latin root, means competition. And it remains, that interpretation remains in English in terms of legal interpretations, in terms of concurring bodies of law, such as and I'm losing a word, the religious freedom and freedom of speech, which are sort of fundamental bodies of legislature that can at times come up against one another, and there is no easy solution to that. And so I thought that concurrences expresses that human experiences are both parallel in some ways, but they also involve human claims to knowledge, claims to the rights, to specific rights, material rights, as well as cultural and social rights, political rights, that come into competition with one another. And so I thought that concurrences in that way was a term that would better describe encounters and consequences of encounters, particularly encounters colored by colonialism.
So colonial encounters is something that researchers both in postcolonial studies but also in global history study. Can you say something on how concurrences relate to both postcolonial studies but also global history?
Yeah, the postcolonial studies has done a marvelous, it's offered a marvelous array of perspectives with which to question assumptions about colonial history, colonial situations, and particularly what it's done is it's broken up the binary between colonist and colonized, and given a much more given us an ability to see that in a much more nuanced perspective. Terms like hybridity, contact zone, and so forth have been incredibly important in post-colonial scholarship, and I think that concurrences in a way sort of builds on these understandings. But I also think that because of this, the dual nature of concurrences, it forces us to think of both entanglements and divisions, divergences, and that to try to keep that within the same interpretation of historical events or historical processes, and not fall into the trap of assuming that there's a time frame. First you have the colonial encounter, and then you have the colonial takeover, and after that the colonized enter into colonial time and become subjects to or subjected to a new hegemony. I think the same thing goes for global history, is that global history too, I think, is a way that it's challenged the national focus, the methodological nationalism of history writing in very, very important ways. But there is a risk and a tendency within all historical writing, really, of assuming a position in which you see the whole, in which you include all parts into the narrative, and streamlining that into a form of master narrative. And I think that concurrences can be used to remind historians of the complexity, that any one interpretation will always be one perspective on things. And also I think that historical work, which I think is being done also in global history to a greater and greater extent, needs to be collaborative, bringing in different skills, different experiences, and different types of sources, which are accessible only by a team of scholars, not by one scholar, the sort of the proverbial researcher scholar in the ivory tower who has the ability to sort of see from above and see the patterns that no one else sees. So I think concurrences in a way is questioning that there is any one such pattern,